Have you ever had a video that you thought you were gonna look back at and you were gonna be like, wow, that was one crazy week? And that's the kind of week that I'm having. But if you can get over the fact that I'm in a dark place and I'm going to talk about dark stuff and you're kind of interested in what the title of this video is, then stick around and watch what I'm going to talk about. Okay guys, my name is Detroit AllyCat if this is the first time you've ever come to my channel, and I talk about really dark stuff and then I talk about not so dark stuff. But today we're going to talk about dark stuff. And if you are a visitor of the channel and you're wondering why is she making one video here, there, everywhere, and there's no videos like there used to be? Well, I'm going to tell you, because you're probably going to want to know why this video is different than the other videos. And there really honestly is no way of saying this like without sounding sad and angry and in a dark place. So we're gonna give it a shot. It has been a really hard year for me, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, it could be worse. It really could. I thought it was gonna get better. Every week I have thought that it was gonna get better. In the beginning of the month, there was a school shooting that was shockingly close, brought me to the subject matter that we're going to talk about shortly. And I thought, you know, this is just something that I was very close to. It shook me up. I have a child in high school, but we're okay. We're okay. Well, I live in the state of Michigan, and the coronavirus is surging right now, more than it has within the 2 years that it's been going on. And for some reason the news media is no longer really talking about it. Not like they were before. Like, you heard about corona. Well, this little wave that we're riding here in Michigan, it really is bad. Last week, the thing that I was most afraid of happening happened. My father, who has all of the things that you could possibly have wrong with you, those things that if you have them wrong with you, the corona can tear you up. Well, he has those. And my mother's even worse. So my parents have the coronavirus currently, and my father is in the ICU, and my mother is always on oxygen, but now she's getting very sick. So we are in this state of like this world where we're gonna see life or death in the next week. And even if it is life, it really is just I don't know what to say. A lot of you guys will understand where I am because you've been through it, and I apologize for all the people that do not want to hear this. But I need to tell you about it, because you're going to think, my goodness, is she a callous woman talking about what she's talking about? And I'm not. I am not a callous woman, and I am not taking the subject matter that I'm going to discuss with you shortly lightly. In fact, I don't think that there would be any other way that I could talk about what I'm going to talk about, because it's dark, it's messed up, and there are no answers to why it's happened. That was enough rambling on about my personal life. I am actually going to leave a timestamp somewhere saying, if you don't want to listen to me talk about my personal stuff, you can just click on here. I don't know where that timestamp is going to be at, because that's going to be involving the editing and all that stuff. Alright, let's talk about one more thing really quick. I have puppies, and my puppy likes to chew on cords. So she has managed to chew on ring lights, big expensive lights that I've bought for this. So it's dark in here, and you know what? It's a dark video. I hope you enjoy my darkness. Eventually, one day, the light will come into my bedroom where I'm filming. Haha, you get to be in my bedroom with me, and in my life. One day, light will be back in my life. I do have some warnings because it's important that you hear these warnings. This is not going to be an easy thing to talk about. You're going to be upset. If you like kids, you're gonna feel grossed out. We are talking about one of the most infamous school shootings in history. There's a lot of them, but this one's pretty well known. We're gonna talk about Columbine. So if this is going to leave you distraught and unable to release that negative energy, I highly suggest you don't watch this video, because a lot of people from Michigan who are going to be watching this video have just recently had a school shooting in their state, and this is going to hit home and it's going to be frightening and dark. I don't know what else to say, but if you're going to stick around with me, let's go. This case, and I say case, it's not really a case. It made me mad, and it was very hard for me to decide that I wanted to do this. We're going to talk about the Columbine school shooting. It was a pretty big and infamous case for many, many reasons, and we'll get into that, but I want to go over the facts of this case and discuss who these people were, what happened, and then we can go into other things that you might find interesting with this case. And then afterwards, I'm going to talk to you about why I covered this case, because it's very important. The Columbine High School massacre happened on April 20th, 1999. It was actually a school shooting, but in the beginning it was meant to be a bombing, and it was actually supposed to imitate the Oklahoma bombing, but the bombs did not actually go off and detonate, so the two shooters, or the two perpetrators of this crime, decided to go in and shoot people. The two boys were 12th grade boys. Kids' name, and I say kids, but I feel like they were pretty much full-grown men, but still kids. Their names were Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. Both Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, they actually ended up killing 12 students and 1 teacher, and then at the end of their crimes, they ended up committing suicide. The vast majority of the crimes committed were actually done in the library, where they ended up killing 10 students there. They injured 21 people. Both the teenagers exchanged gunfire with the police department, and at the time that Columbine happened, it was actually the deadliest shooting in American history. The Columbine shooting actually inspired many copycats. There seemed to be a whole thing about Columbine. It was actually something that a lot of teenagers looked at and kind of identified with Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, and it almost felt like they would like make up in their minds why they did it and the reasons that they did it, and that they would actually say that they were heroes. And it was very disturbing. It had more copycats than any high school shooting ever. There were 71 copycats in total. Actually, there were so many copycats, and this shooting became so famous that when another high school shooting would happen, the new nickname and the coined phrase was Columbine. It was used to describe a school shooting. Columbine is located in Colorado. The shooting occurred between 11:19 and 12:08. It's kind of interesting, but the boys learned how to make pipe bombs and all kinds of chemical bombs and all kinds of weird things. And they had a whole bunch of them with them. And you know what? Thank goodness that they did not succeed in learning how to properly detonate a lot of these explosives, because that's really what saved so many lives that day. Prior to the shooting itself, they actually went into the school cafeteria. They planted several bombs. They ended up putting 2 in the cafeteria. They put some in some cars. They put 2 in a field, and that was like 3 miles away. The 2 that were put in the field were set up as a diversion so that all the police and whoever they call when a bomb goes off, they would all be down in that area away from the high school, so maximum damage and fatalities could occur. There's a lot of speculation as to why this happened. Even the mother of Dylan Klebold, she actually has done a lot of like speeches about why she thinks it happened. And you know, there's a lot of teenagers that make videos about this, and they all say, like, you know, they think that it was bullying. And I agree that there probably was a certain amount of bullying that had a lot to do with this, but I don't think that that is necessarily the entire reason as to why this happened. I can't tell you what the answer is because honestly, with Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, that answer lies. I really think it's a combination of many things, but the only person or people that can answer it is the two boys that committed the crime. They were really hoping to kill the most victims in the massacre in U.S. history. They were really interested in the Oklahoma bombing and they studied it. For those of you who don't know what the Oklahoma bombing is, it's Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols. They ended up bombing a government building and killing 168 victims. For some reason with the Oklahoma bombing, you only really hear about Timothy McVeigh, and there was indeed someone else involved. That was Terry Nichols. I think that the reason that they studied the Oklahoma bombing and the connection there is something that, you know, should be noted. There are lots of different things that were interesting about Columbine. One of the biggest things about Columbine is that the police did not enter the building until a couple hours after the shooting had stopped. And they had been really criticized for that. It's really hard to figure out what somebody could do when faced with that situation. In 1999, you know, there just started to be bombings and stuff like that. I mean, bombings have been happening for a couple hundred years, but as the technology and the study of criminology evolves, they start to find out more and more things. And one of the things that they teach police officers or civil servants is that when there is a bomb in the building, you're not supposed to run in. So the training that, you know, these government officials or civil servants had was to remain out of the building. I can't say that it was the right decision or the wrong decision. I just know that because of the explosives that are involved in this, that they didn't rush in. And they were criticized for it because children died. There was a Columbine memorial that opened September 21st, 2007. There was a lot of controversy about this memorial because right after the shooting happened, they erected these crosses and it was like a temporary memorial, and they actually put crosses up for Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. And a lot of people were really mad, like, why did they deserve crosses? And, you know, people graffitied on them. And as strange as it is, people also graffitied on them that God would forgive them and nice things too. I looked at the crosses and it was an eerie thing to see. But I could see how the parents would be very angry about the perpetrators who committed the crime having a memorial with the victims that were part of the crime and were completely innocent of everything being mourned in the same area. It is a bit inappropriate. Something that I'd like to make mention right now is that 9/11 still has not happened at this point. 9/11, one of the biggest terrorist attacks in the United States, and I think at a certain point was the largest amount of American lives ever taken on American soil, happened in 2001 when the Twin Towers were hit by planes that were hijacked. So this still did not happen, but it's important to hear that part because you're gonna read some really disturbing things about Columbine that are slightly connected to that. The first victim that was shot was a young lady named Rachel Joy Scott. She was 17 years old, and she was actually outside in front of the school. She was by the west entrance, and she was shot 15 feet away. She was eating lunch, and there are a lot of it's almost like a little side story in itself because of who Rachel Joy Scott was. She was very religious, and she was a very good person. She was really into school, and she had I believe it was like a couple sisters and brothers, but she had a brother who was actually inside Columbine in the library at the time of the shooting. She was with her friend, Richard Castaldo, and he ended up being shot 8 times and was paralyzed. Her car was inside of the parking lot, and it remained there for like a week or so after Columbine occurred, and it became into a memorial. It was an Acura Legend, and people wrote notes and put flowers and just put things all over her car. She wrote an essay prior to being murdered, and it was called My Ethics, My Code of Life. Her family thought she was a martyr, and they had her car as a memorial at the high school, and she seemed like she was a really great student. And I just feel that, the reason that they said that she was a martyr is because they felt like, I just felt like it was a way of them dealing with their grief. Personally, that's what I think. I don't know if I would call her a martyr or not, but that's what I believe, is that it just helped them with their grief process. But who am I? Let's talk about Eric Harris. He used to like to play first person shooting games, video games, and I don't really play video games myself, but I do like to watch them, so I know a little bit about them. He was really into Doom and Doom 2. He also worked at a fireworks stand, and a lot of people don't realize this, but fireworks really are just explosives. And a lot of people think that fireworks are really cool, but you have to detonate a firework, and it actually is an explosive. And something that I thought was really interesting is that I heard that the owners of the fireworks stand that Eric Harris used to work at is they gave him 6 buckets of fireworks, and they would take them to the mountains and shoot them off. And they also used to take those fireworks and try to get gunpowder out of them so that they can make pipe bombs and stuff like that. And this is according to their friends, so we don't know for sure, but they said that that's what they did. We know for sure that they received a bunch of fireworks from this firework stand. They said that Eric Harris used to sneak out of his house a lot to go light fireworks. It just seemed like Eric Harris really had a fascination with explosives. Honestly, Dylan Klebold did too. The Columbine mascot for the high school was called the Rebels, and Eric and Dylan, they snuck out to do rebel missions. That's what they used to call it. And they had nicknames. They were nicknamed Reb and Vodka. Eric Harris being Reb and Dylan Klebold being Vodka. In 1996, Harris created a blog on AOL. Remember AOL? Some of you guys are going to be like, what is AOL? It's like the first chat rooms ever. Eric Harris created a blog on there, and he would talk about his video game, what he was doing on it, like Doom and Doom 1. After a while, he started writing about pipe bombs and the different things he liked to do with the pipe bombs. And one of the quotes on the blog actually said, "The first true pipe bombs created entirely from scratch by rebels, Reb and Vodka. Now our only problem is to find the place that will be ground zero." And that's something that a lot of people became slightly obsessive with, was the fact that they had mentioned ground zero. So a lot of high school students talked about ground zero after that. On the blog, he would write of threats of violence. It was actually discovered by a student, Brooks Brown. It's kind of interesting, like that whole Brooks Brown. He was actually one of Dylan's friends, and I believe Dylan kind of like gave him the heads up, like that Eric had written some stuff about him on this blog, and somehow his parents, Brooks Brown's parents, had seen the blog, and they went to the sheriff, and they basically like told the sheriff about it, and they saw it, and I mean, really, it was kind of a huge red flag that something bad was really going to happen. But the thing is with Brooks Brown and Eric Harris is that Brooks Brown decided, like, he was like, I'm gonna like talk it out or work it out with Eric Harris. At least this is what I read, and I don't know if this is like the actual like factual story, but this is what I heard, is that he had like talked it out with Eric Harris and had basically like worked it out with him and wanted to like not be friends, but like figure out why they like he didn't like him, and they ended up working it out and not being mad at each other, or at least, you know, Eric Harris didn't want to like murder Brooks Brown anymore. I know I'm laughing, but it's kind of sad, you know, that you would have to hash it out with somebody so that they didn't want to make a blog about how they wanted to blow you up. And I can only imagine how scared Brooks Brown's parents were when they found that blog, and how much that they were even more scared or even more upset after Columbine's shooting had actually happened. And the thing that was kind of crazy is that they had assigned an investigator, Michael Guerrero, and Michael Guerrero did a lot of investigating, and he found threats, and he found a pipe bomb, and he had put in for a search warrant for Eric Harris's house, and the judge never saw it, or it never got submitted into it, and so the search warrant never happened. But this was like 2 years before the Columbine shooting actually happened. So had they like paid attention to this more closely, it could have prevented everything. And that's something that's really important, because you have to start learning what these signs are that something horrible like this is going to happen. And I think that this case really showed police and teachers and just everyone involved, like, you have to take these things seriously, and there has to be a game plan for when things like this happened. Because at that point, I just feel like they kind of just like, they ignored it. Like, this will never happen. On October 2nd, 1997, he was caught trying to hack in the high school website to get locker combos. On January 30th, 1998, he broke into a van and stole tools and camp equipment. And actually, I think it was still in Klebold and Eric Harris who did this, and they actually went in front of a judge, and they still have this like recording of the judge talking to them. And it's really crazy, because like the judge is like talking to them, and you can tell like these two young men just completely fool the judge. And the judge can tell that they're very smart. And like, these boys just say whatever the judge wants to hear, and the judge basically says, you know, you guys are really good, and just, you have to get your life back together. But the fact that these kids had like criminal backgrounds, and that like the sheriff knew about them, and like these red flags happened, and they even went in front of a judge, and this still occurred. It's just very important that we talk about that, because it's all part of it. In Harris's yearbook in 1998, he put down inside the yearbook, killing enemies, blowing stuff up, killing cops. My wrath for the January incident will seem godlike, not to mention our revenge in the Commons. Commons was slang for the cafeteria. So the Columbine shooting happened in 1999, and the yearbook was in 1998. So we have evidence that they were planning this shooting, this massacre, well into a year in advance. And that's important to note too, because all these red flags, they seem like no big deal at the time. Now it seems like a big deal. But had the Columbine shooting didn't happen, people would not take this seriously still to this day. it's just important because, you know, you have a lot of flags that happen to these shootings. Just like the shooting that happened here in Michigan. It's coming out that there were more and more things that like told officials like, hey, this might happen. Like he had an Instagram account, the kid in Oxford, and he had pictures on it. And, you know, it's these types of things that is important for the police to take very seriously. But, you know, I would like to say that they do now, but we just had another school shooting, and both Harris and Klebold kept journals, and they would document what their plan is and what they were going to do. These journals were actually released in 2006. I tried to like look all over the place for these journals. I couldn't find them, but I do know that the police and actually the families of some of the victims had agreed to destroy some evidence so it could never be published, so it could never be repeated. And especially with how many copycats have come out with Columbine, it all seems to make sense. But I do want to talk about something that I did find out was in the journals, even though I couldn't find the exact quotation. Eric Harris typed out a plan to hijack an aircraft at the Denver airport and crash it into New York City. Now remember, this is before 9/11. And the other thing that I thought that was really crazy was Dylan Klebold's birthday. Dylan Klebold was born September 11th, 1981. Okay? So Dylan Klebold was born on September 11th. And Eric Harris, I think up to a year prior, before Columbine, wrote about hijacking a Denver aircraft and crashing it into some place in New York. And you know, honestly, there's only a few places that you can crash an aircraft and do like serious damage like 9/11 did. And I don't know if that was the plan, but I just think that I read that and I was like astonished. I know it's like a conspiracy theory or whatever. I just found it very odd. And I don't know, maybe you will. I just think it's very strange how certain things work out sometimes. And maybe they mean nothing. Or maybe they mean something. Who knows? Eric made entries in his journal about raping and torturing girls in his bedroom, and he made entries about cannibalism and wanting to dismember women and having sex with them. And it's important that we talk about that because there's a lot of people that like to like fantasize about Eric Harris, especially females, and I know that's really sick to even talk and say that, but it's true. You can look up fan fiction about Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, and you can find some of the most craziest things. Like, people have crushes on them because they murdered children. I mean, like, just that sentence alone just makes me incredibly shocked. Like, you're fantasizing about someone who's a child killer, and make no mistake, those children in that high school, those were kids. Those were kids. And it's not just other kids that fantasize about them. It's adults. It's like, it's so crazy. And I know that like teenagers do say a lot of crazy things, because I was a teenager once. You know, almost everybody was a teenager, and it's a crazy time in your life, and you say a lot of crazy things. But the problem with the fact that, you know, or Eric wrote these things down in his journal is we are talking about somebody who committed homicide. So there's a pretty likely chance that if he wouldn't have died in Columbine or something would have happened that day, he could have continued on with all these crazy things and hurt somebody, like dismembered them or raped them, or, I mean, this is just a very sick individual. And there were also tapes, and these tapes, there were like 3 different kinds of tapes. There were the basement tapes. It was recorded with, so there were 3 different tapes. These there were the basement tapes, there were the Hitman for Hire, and there was the Rampart Rampage. I don't know if these are just the names that people gave these tapes, or these are actually like what Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold gave these tapes. But these tapes became very famous, and something to make mention is that they were actually using school equipment to make these videotapes, so they're using pretty professional equipment. And then I guess there were more tapes too. There was a tape that detailed the plan of the massacre. I always thought that was the basement tape, but there could be another tape. And then there was the last tape that they ever made. It was the goodbye tape. It was 30 minutes before the shooting, and it was to their friends and family. And they kind of basically said they were sorry, and you know, it wasn't their fault that they had did that. And you know, they went on to tell their parents, like, you guys were good parents, and you know, this had nothing to do with you. December 1999, Time actually published an article on the tape, and there was information about what was on the tapes that the families did not know about, and the families threatened to sue, I believe it was the police department and Time. The story is that they ended up destroying the tapes. You can find the transcripts of some of the tapes, and I have seen at one time the Hitman for Hire was on YouTube. Other than that, you can't find anything else about the tape. And the Hitman for Hire is a very important little piece to this puzzle, because this is actually what the Trenchcoat Mafia was about. It was actually just like a fictional little video that they made. I don't know if it was like for a school project or they were just making short films. It was about people who were getting bullied, and they would allow these people to pay them to go beat up the bullies, which there's been a lot of speculation, like, is this part of the reason why they killed people that day at Columbine? Or, you know, I don't know. But the biggest thing is to make note is that everybody talked about how there was an actual Trenchcoat Mafia. There wasn't a Trenchcoat Mafia. That was just a fictional movie that they made. Did they wear trench coats? Yes, they wore trench coats, but there was no Trenchcoat Mafia. And the teenagers after Columbine, they were very like, they all had gone through a very traumatic situation, and their emotions were really heightened because they lived through this horrible thing. And so these boys that had gone completely unnoticed by so many people, now bits and pieces of what you remember and you're putting together, and everyone's really interested in them now because they want to make sense of what happened. There was another miniature tape. It was called Nixon, and Harris left it on the kitchen table the day before, and Harris put on the tape, "People will die because of me." He said that it would be a day to be remembered. I really feel like Eric Harris really, I think both the boys thought that this was like, part of doing this was going to make them famous. And they were right. They're famous for all the wrong reasons. But it was something they talked about, like they would always be remembered. And as sad as it is, they will always be remembered. They planned to detonate a bomb in the cafeteria at the busiest time. They actually had timed it out and gone to the cafeteria many different times to figure out what exactly the busiest time was going to be. And I believe it was like 11:17 through 11:19, somewhere in that time was when it was supposed to detonate. The bombs actually failed to detonate. I believe I said that before, and that's why people in the high school had actually 188 rounds were fired by Harris, and that was twice as much as Klebold. When they planted the bombs in the cafeteria, nobody saw them, and it's very strange because right before the bombs were supposed to detonate, there was someone changing a tape, and they think that the bombs were planted in the cafeteria. After they planted the bombs in the cafeteria, they changed their clothes, returned to Columbine. The cafeteria was the primary target. Harris saw Brooks Brown, and he was actually walking out, and Harris said to him, "Brooks, I like you now, get out of here." And Brooks said he had this really uneasy feeling, and he left school that day. And, you know, Brooks Brown, he was pretty traumatized. He went on to teach students, or I don't know, you can find some videos of Brooks Brown later on in life when he's older, and it's really interesting, and I suggest you do it because I think it's interesting to see how this person who went through such a huge tragedy ended up doing things with his life and having a child. And Harris and Klebold armed themselves under their trench coats. Harris had a t-shirt on that said natural selection. This was really big deal for so many people. Now they have t-shirts out there that you can buy that say natural selection. At 11:19, when the cafeteria bombs failed to detonate, that's when the shooting started. They killed Rachel Joy Scott first. Klebold threw a pipe bomb in the parking lot that only smoked, and everybody thought that it was a joke and that they were filming one of their videos or making a movie. But then someone screamed, "Go, go, go," and they pulled out weapons. Harris aimed his carbine down a staircase. Now this is interesting because I thought the staircase was inside the high school, but now I think that the staircase was outside the high school. He injured Kirkland and he injured Sean Graves. There was a teacher in the cafeteria that heard all this going on. They warned the students. They told them to go hide. Lance Kirkland was laying on the floor and he said, "Help, help." And then Klebold looked down and said, "Sure, I'll help you." And then shot him in the face. And this is a very important part of the story because everybody likes to talk about how Eric Harris was the vicious part of the two. And he was very vicious, but people seem to go easy on Klebold and say that, like, you know, he was a better guy. He was a nicer guy. He didn't shoot as much bullets. He was not a nicer guy. He was not more innocent than Eric Harris. I mean, they both were pretty messed up and did pretty horrible things. So I just want you to remember that part of the story where Dylan Klebold looks down, says he's going to help somebody, and then shoots them in the face. That's pretty vicious, and I just want to point that out because I've read so much about how Dylan was the nice guy. There's no nice guy in this, like, little duo. Graves was paralyzed, crawled in a door, he rubbed blood on his face and played dead. And Klebold, when he walked over him, looked down and said, "Sorry, dude." And maybe that's why people think he was a nice guy, but if he had been awake and was crying for help, he would have been shot again. They went towards the library. Witnesses heard them say, "This is what we always wanted to do. This is awesome." A lot of people talked about, like, how they were like, "Woo," or "Yeah," and they were so excited about what was going on, and they remember that. And it was very hard for them to remember that because they don't understand how somebody could be so excited and happy about how much pain they were inflicting, but that is what those two boys did. The art teacher tried to warn the library students, but was shot, called 911, and you can actually hear the videotape or the recording of her talking, and she tells the kids to, like, hide underneath the library tables, which I don't know if that was the right thing to do. And there were a lot of people that talked about this teacher because at one point the 911 caller tells her, like, "Hey, can you stand up and block the door, the library door?" And she basically says, "No, I'm scared and I have kids of my own." And for like 30 seconds they wait for Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold to enter the room. And it is true that if she would have done that, maybe she could have stopped the killings, or maybe could have just got killed immediately herself. So I don't think we can really judge anybody who's being put in that much of a traumatic situation unless we were there. I just feel that way. I don't know if I'm wrong or right. It's very hard to say anything about wrong or rights because I don't think there are any wrong or rights except for, obviously, the shooters themselves were completely wrong in everything they did. Harris started shooting, like, under the desks. They ordered the kids to stand up if they had white hats. The shootings occurred between 11:29 to 11:36. Right before that, at 11:22, police response, and the police were actually on the property. That's when the gunfire broke out between Eric Harris, Dylan Klebold, and the police. I know I went a little bit backwards, but that's how it was. So at that time, between 11:29 and 11:36, Eric and Dylan are walking around the library, just pretty much taking people out in a very gruesome, cold-hearted way. I don't really want to go through every individual because I don't think that's going to help explain the whole story. I think it's just like gruesome details. They did walk around shooting everyone. At one point, they were going from table to table, and then one kid pops his head out. He's like, "Hey," and he's like, "Is that you, John Savage?" And it actually turns out to be one of Dylan's friend. And John Savage is like, "Yeah." He's like, "What are you doing, Dylan?" And Dylan Klebold goes, "Oh, killing people." And like John Savage looks at him and he's like, "Are you gonna kill me?" And he's like, "No, dude, get out of here, run." And he tells him to run, and for that he lives. In the library, they ended up killing 10 people. They wounded 12, and at 12:08, both Dylan and Eric, after they pretty much like go around shooting people and causing all this havoc, they shoot themselves. In total, there were 15 dead, and that was including Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris. And this is such a devastating incident. The part that really got to me is that the death and the victims did not end that day at Columbine. 6 months later, Amory Hatcher's mom, which was one of the victims at Columbine, she actually killed herself. Greg Barnes, he saw the Sanders shooting, which was one of the teachers, so he was a student. He committed suicide in the year 2000. Austin Eubanks in 2019 died of an opioid overdose in 37. He had been shot. He had been taking painkillers, and he got off painkillers, and he talked about it, and then all of a sudden he ended up taking too many painkillers and dying. And that's just the ones that I could find very quickly in my research. There are so many other things and so many stories. Like, I could talk about Columbine forever. I really could. And I just want to go through a little bit before I end this. And these are some of the facts. Eric Harris, his family was in the Air Force. He was born April 9th, 1981, and he lived to April 20th, 1999. Dylan Klebold, he was born September 11th, 1981 to April, and he died April 20th, 1999, and he was born Lutheran. There was a lot of like talk about why this happened, like I said before, and there was so much about Columbine and pop culture. Marilyn Manson did a piece on him, and for those of you who don't know who Marilyn Manson is, he's like one of the big goth industrial singers, and you know, he was blamed for Columbine because they said his music was too violent. Eric Harris was a fan of Natural Born Killers, so everyone blamed Natural Born Killers. You'll never know what the answer to this case is. Some more information I do want to talk about is there were 74 copycat cases. 21 of those were actual attacks where somebody died. 21 copycat cases where someone died. In those 21 cases, actually those 74 cases, they say that Klebold and Harris are their heroes. The first copycat that was done after Columbine was 8 days after. So Columbine happens, and 8 days later, there's a copycat situation. Can you imagine how scared you would be if you were one of the victims of Columbine and that happened? So that is my Columbine. That's my Columbine story. It's probably huge, massive, way more than I wanted to go into it, but I tried to cover the parts that I thought were most important. And now here's the thing that I want to talk about. I've been accused of trying to get famous from doing these cases and talking about them, and that's not true. Not in the slightest. And the truth is that most of these cases that I put on YouTube, they're demonetized. And they're demonetized because they're too violent to be, you know, you can't have commercials in it. Sponsors don't want to sponsor this. And there are some pretty big YouTubers that do true crime, and I've seen them. But the reason that I'm doing this is because I believe that you cannot forget your past. You can't. You have to learn from it, and you have to study it. And the thing is that Columbine happened, and all these mistakes happened in Columbine, and they were like, we're gonna fix these. And they did. They implemented some kind of protocol called Alice protocol. And in the Oxford school shooting that just occurred like 15 days ago in Oxford, Michigan, they implemented the Alice protocol, which basically barricaded kids in the rooms like the 911 lady told the other lady to do. And a ton of kids, I believe, were saved. And the point of talking about that is because everybody needs to listen to these cases, especially these high school shootings. They're dangerous to talk about. They are. And I didn't want to do it. But I don't want people to forget. This is something that keeps happening over and over again. And there has to be a reason, and we have to talk about it, because these are our kids, and it's just a lot of violence, and I don't know what the answer is, but there's probably going to be a lot of people that watch this video over the years. It's going to stay on YouTube until who knows what happens in the United States, but however long this video stays on YouTube, I want you to hear me. We have to figure out how to stop having shootings in our schools. It is like the utmost priority. Like, there's a lot of crime in the world, but the worst crime is on our children because they're innocent and they deserve to be protected. And that's why I focus so much on child abuse and child crimes and stuff like that. It's not because I'm fascinated with it and I think that it's awesome. I think it's horrible. I think it's horrific. So many of these crimes are horrific, and they're very hard for me to cover. And I get a lot of like criticism, like, oh, you are a crazy looking voodoo lady who likes Halloween. Yeah, I do. I like Halloween. I really enjoy skeletons and spooky stuff. That has nothing to do with my views on criminal justice and how we as a society have to do better. So if you can't get over my dreads and my little skeletons and my pumpkins, then you have to do some inward searching of yourself, because that's not what you should have heard or saw today. You should have heard a really sad story, and maybe I need to work on how I present that. I know I do. It's been a rough year, trust me. But, I did it, and I wanted to do it, and it was part of my healing process through this year. And I appreciate that you took the time to watch this video. Thank you so much. I hope that I made you think. That's all I ask. If you want to subscribe to my channel, who knows if I'll be having more videos up, because things are pretty rough for me here. But if you do, I'm gonna do my damnedest to stay on YouTube, because it's been a lifelong dream. And no matter how much the world keeps knocking me down, you better believe I'm going to keep standing up and fighting for what I believe in, even if I feel like I want to lay in bed all day and not make videos. I'll be here, even if it's once a month. Okay, guys, have an amazing day, and as always, stay spooky and stay safe. Bye.